For 6 months, Serafina Thorne brought breakfast to an old man every single morning. A peanut butter sandwich, a banana, coffee, and a thermos. 6:15 a.m., without fail at the same bus stop where he slept. She was 22, black, working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over her head. He was 68, white, homeless, telling stories nobody believed. Then one morning, everything changed. 3 military officers knocked on her apartment door at dawn. Dress uniforms, a colonel standing at attention on her cracked doorstep. When Serafina opened the door, still in her hospital uniform, exhausted from a double shift, her heart dropped. "Miss Thorne," the colonel said, "we're here about Arthur Sterling." "Arthur? The old man from the bus stop." Her voice shook. "Did something happen to him?" The colonel's face was grave. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what you did for him." 6 months earlier, Serafina had noticed him for the first time. She took the number 47 bus every morning at 6:30. The stop was 3 blocks from her apartment, right outside a closed-down laundromat. That's where Arthur slept, on a flattened cardboard box, a wool blanket pulled up to his chin, his few belongings stuffed into a trash bag beside him. Most people walked past without looking. Some crossed the street to avoid him. Serafina had done the same thing for 2 weeks, telling herself she didn't have enough to help. She barely had enough for herself. But one morning in late March, she'd packed an extra sandwich for lunch and realized she wouldn't have time to eat it. Her shift at the hospital cafeteria ran until 3 hours. Then she had to be at the grocery store by 4 to stock shelves until midnight. The sandwich would just go bad in her locker. Arthur was awake when she approached. His eyes were sharp, clearer than she expected. He watched her carefully like he was used to people either ignoring him or yelling at him to move along. "Excuse me," Serafina said, holding out the wrapped sandwich. "I made too much. You want this?" He stared at the sandwich, then at her face. For a long moment, he didn't move. "You need that more than I do," he said quietly. "That's debatable," Serafina replied, "but I'm offering." He took it with both hands like it was something precious. "Thank you, Miss Serafina." "Arthur." He nodded once. "Arthur Sterling." She almost walked away then, almost went back to her routine of not seeing him, not getting involved. But something about the way he'd said thank you with dignity, not desperation, made her pause. "Do you take your coffee black or with sugar?" she asked, his eyebrows lifted. "Black's fine." The next morning she brought coffee in a thermos and a banana. The morning after that, another sandwich and an apple. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine she couldn't imagine breaking. 6:15 a.m. Every single day, Arthur was always awake, always waiting at the same spot. They'd talk for 5, maybe 10 minutes before her bus came. He'd ask about her classes. She was taking nursing courses at the community college 2 nights a week when she could afford it. She'd ask about his day, and he'd tell her stories. Strange stories. "Back in my helicopter days," he'd say, staring past her at nothing. "We flew senators out to places that don't exist on maps." Or, "I worked for a 3-letter agency once. Can't tell you which one, but I can tell you those folks don't forget faces." Serafina figured he was confused. Maybe mentally ill, maybe just old and lonely, building himself a past that felt more important than sleeping on cardboard. She didn't correct him. She just listened. Other people weren't so kind. One morning in April, a businessman in an expensive suit walked past and deliberately kicked Arthur's blanket into the gutter. Serafina was 10 feet away, about to cross the street. "Hey!" She spun around, her voice sharp. "What's wrong with you?" The businessman didn't even slow down. "He's blocking the sidewalk." That's somebody's grandfather, Serafina shot back. The man kept walking. Arthur sat quietly, pulling his blanket back from the dirty water pooling at the curb. His hands shook. From cold or anger, Serafina couldn't tell. She helped him wring out the blanket. It smelled like mildew and exhaust fumes. "You didn't have to do that," Arthur said softly. "Yeah, I did." He looked at her for a long time. Then he smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You've got a fight in you. That's good." He folded the damp blanket across his lap. "You're going to need it." Serafina didn't understand what he meant. Not then. She just handed him his coffee, same as always, and waited for the bus. By May, the routine was as automatic as breathing. Wake up at 5, make 2 sandwiches, one for Arthur, one for herself, pack a banana, pour coffee into the thermos, walk 3 blocks, sit with Arthur for 10 minutes, catch the 6:30 bus. It wasn't charity. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like the only thing in her life that made sense. Serafina's apartment was a studio on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. 300 square feet, a hot plate instead of a stove, a bathroom where the shower only worked if you kicked the pipes first. Rent was $650 a month, and she was always 2 weeks behind. The eviction notice had been taped to her door in March. She'd talked the landlord into a payment plan, an extra $40 a week until she caught up. She'd been paying it off ever since, which meant every other bill got pushed to the edge. Her kitchen counter told the story. Electric bill past due. Medical debt from an emergency room visit 2 years ago in collections. Student loan payment deferred again. Cell phone 1 month from disconnection. And in the middle of all that paper, a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Serafina stood at the counter on a Tuesday night in late May, doing the math in her head. She'd gotten paid that morning, $280 from the hospital, another $160 from the grocery store. Subtract rent, subtract the payment plan, subtract bus fare for 2 weeks, $90 left for everything else. She opened the fridge, a carton of eggs with 3 left, half a jug of milk, some wilted lettuce she should have thrown out days ago. That was it. Her stomach had been empty since lunch, but she'd learned to ignore that feeling. She'd eat tomorrow or the day after. It didn't matter. What mattered was the bread and peanut butter. Enough for another week of sandwiches for Arthur. Maybe 2 weeks if she stretched it. Serafina closed the fridge and leaned against it, pressing her forehead to the cold metal door. She could stop. She could keep the sandwiches for herself, save the coffee money, catch up on the electric bill before they shut it off. Arthur would understand. He'd probably tell her to stop anyway if he knew how tight things were. But the thought of walking past that bus stop, seeing him there, not stopping, she couldn't do it. At the hospital cafeteria the next day, Mrs. Tanaka noticed. Mrs. Tanaka was the kitchen supervisor, 60-some Chinese American, with the kind of sharp eyes that saw everything. She'd worked at the hospital for 30 years and had seen every version of struggling that existed. "Are you eating today?" Mrs. Tanaka asked, watching Serafina wipe down tables during the lunch rush. "I ate breakfast," Serafina lied. "Uh-huh." Mrs. Tanaka crossed her arms. "Are you feeding that homeless man again?" Serafina's shoulders stiffened. "His name is Arthur." "I know his name, honey. I'm asking if you're feeding him instead of yourself." "I'm fine," Mrs. Tanaka sighed. She disappeared into the kitchen and came back 5 minutes later with a container of leftover pasta and a bread roll. She pressed it into Serafina's hands. "You eat this now. I don't want to see you passing out on my shift." Her voice softened. "He's a person. I get it. But you know what else?" "What?" "You're a person, too." Serafina stared at the container. Her throat felt tight. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just eat." That night, lying on her mattress on the floor, she'd sold the bed frame 2 months ago to make rent. Serafina stared at the ceiling and did the math again. If she skipped her Thursday class, she could pick up an extra shift at the grocery store, another $40. If she walked to work instead of taking the bus 3 days a week, she'd save $12. If she asked the landlord for one more week, her phone buzzed. A text from the electric company. Final notice. Service will be disconnected in 7 days without payment of $127. Serafina closed her eyes. One more week of bringing Arthur breakfast. That's all she'd commit to. One more week, and then she'd have to stop. She'd explain it to him. He'd understand. She had to take care of herself first. That's what anyone would say. That's what made sense. But when Friday morning came, Serafina still made 2 sandwiches, still poured coffee into the thermos, still walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. Arthur was waiting, same as always, and when he split his sandwich in half and handed part of it back to her. "Fair is fair," he said simply. Serafina had to turn away so he wouldn't see her crying. Arthur wasn't at the bus stop on Monday morning. Serafina stood there with the sandwich and thermos, scanning the empty sidewalk. His cardboard was gone. His trash bag of belongings. Gone. Even the damp spot where he usually slept had dried up, leaving no trace he'd ever been there. She waited until her bus came and went. Waited through the next one. By the time she finally climbed aboard the 3rd bus, she was going to be late for her shift, and her chest felt hollow. She told herself he'd just moved to a different spot. People did that. Maybe someone had hassled him. Maybe the police had cleared the block. It didn't mean anything bad had happened, but she checked the spot again that evening after work. Still nothing. Tuesday morning, empty. Wednesday, empty. By Thursday, Serafina couldn't ignore the knot in her stomach anymore. She stopped by the Mercy Street shelter on her way home from the grocery store, even though it was 10 blocks out of her way, and her feet were killing her. The woman at the intake desk barely looked up. "Name?" "I'm looking for someone. Arthur Sterling. Older white man, late 60s, usually sleeps near the bus stop on Clayton." "We don't track people who don't check in here." "Can you just look?" Serafina pressed. "Please." The woman sighed and typed something into her computer. Waited, shook her head. "No one by that name in our system." "What about the hospitals? Is there a way to check? You family?" Serafina hesitated. "I'm a friend." "Then no. Privacy laws." The woman's tone softened just slightly. "Look, honey, people move around. He probably found another spot. They always do." Serafina called 3 hospitals that night. None of them would tell her anything without a family connection or a patient ID number she didn't have. On the 7th day, she went back to the bus stop with a paper bag and a note inside. "Hope you're okay. S." She left it where Arthur usually slept and tried not to think about what it meant that she was leaving food for a ghost. That afternoon, he was there. Serafina almost missed her stop on the bus home because she wasn't expecting to see him. But there he was, sitting on the same flattened cardboard, his trash bag beside him. Thinner than before, his face more drawn. She got off at the next stop and ran back. "Arthur!" He looked up, and for a second she thought he didn't recognize her. Then his face softened. "Miss Serafina." She crouched down beside him, breathing hard. "Where were you?" "I checked shelters. I called hospitals." Had a spell. His voice was raspier than usual. "I'm all right now." "You don't look all right." "I'm upright. That counts for something." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when she noticed his hand. A fresh scar across the back of it, still pink and healing. It looked surgical, too clean to be from a fall or a fight. "What happened to your hand?" Arthur pulled his sleeve down quickly. "Nothing. Old wound acting up. Arthur, I'm fine. His tone left no room for argument. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. White, slightly crumpled, with an address written in shaky handwriting on the front. He held it out to her. If something happens to me, he said quietly, I need you to mail this. Serafina stared at the envelope. What do you mean? If something happens, just promise me. You're not going anywhere. Serafina. His voice was firm, serious. Promise me. She took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. I promise. Arthur nodded slowly like a weight had lifted. Good girl. She wanted to ask what was inside, wanted to ask why he'd been gone, where he'd been, what that scar really meant. But her bus was coming, and Arthur had already closed his eyes, leaning back against the brick wall like the conversation had exhausted him. Serafina slipped the envelope into her bag and caught the bus. She didn't open it. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Arthur collapsed. Serafina was handing him the thermos of coffee when his hand started shaking. Not the usual tremor from cold or age. This was different. Violent. The thermos slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the sidewalk, coffee spilling across the concrete. Arthur. He tried to say something, but his words came out slurred. His eyes rolled back, and then his whole body folded, knees buckling, shoulders crumpling forward. Serafina caught him before his head hit the pavement. Somebody call 911, she screamed. A woman across the street pulled out her phone. A man in jogging gear stopped, hesitated, then kept running. 2 people getting off the bus just stared. Serafina lowered Arthur onto his side, her hands shaking. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His lips were turning pale. Stay with me, she whispered. Come on, Arthur. Stay with me. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Felt like 7 hours. Serafina climbed into the back without asking permission. One of the paramedics tried to stop her. Are you family? But she was already inside, gripping Arthur's hand as they loaded him onto the gurney. I'm all he's got, she said. The paramedic didn't argue. At the hospital, everything moved too fast and too slow at the same time. They wheeled Arthur through double doors into the emergency room. A nurse took Serafina's arm and guided her to a waiting area. Green chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a TV on mute showing the morning news. She sat down, realized she was still holding the empty thermos. Her shift at the cafeteria had started 20 minutes ago. She pulled out her phone and texted Mrs. Tanaka. Emergency. Can't make it today. I'm sorry. Mrs. Tanaka replied immediately. You okay? Arthur collapsed. I'm at the hospital. Which one? St. Vincent's. I'll cover your shift. Keep me posted. Serafina closed her eyes and tried not to cry. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a nurse called her name. Serafina Thorne. She jumped up. That's me. The nurse led her to a desk where a woman in scrubs sat behind a computer, looking exhausted and annoyed in equal measure. Her name tag read, Brenda. Patient intake. You're here for Arthur Sterling? The woman asked, without looking up. Yes, is he okay? He's stable. Severe dehydration, possible stroke. We're running tests. She clicked through something on her screen. But we have a problem. He has no insurance card, no ID, no emergency contact. We need to transfer him to the county overflow. Serafina's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he'll get care, but not here. County General has space. County General is a nightmare. I've heard the stories. People wait for days. It's policy, the woman said flatly. Without proof of insurance or ability to pay. He's a veteran. Serafina's voice came out sharper than she intended. Check the VA system. The woman finally looked up. Do you have proof of that? No, but… Then I can't check. We need documentation. A VA card, discharge papers, something. Serafina's mind raced. She thought about the envelope Arthur had given her, still sitting in her bag at home. Thought about the stories he'd told. The helicopters, the three-letter agencies, the senators. She'd always assumed he was confused. But what if he wasn't? I'm his niece, Serafina said. The woman's eyebrows rose. His niece? Yes. And you don't have any of his paperwork? He's been living on the street. He doesn't keep paperwork in his pocket. Serafina leaned forward. But I know he served. I know he has benefits. Just run the check, please. The woman stared at her for a long moment, clearly skeptical. Then someone behind them, a doctor in a white coat, South Asian, maybe mid-40s, spoke up. Run it, Brenda. The intake woman turned. Dr. Moretti, just run it as a courtesy. Dr. Moretti looked at Serafina. If there's a match, we keep him. If not, county. Fair? Serafina nodded quickly. Fair. Brenda sighed and started typing. The wait felt endless, 30 seconds that stretched into infinity. Then the computer beeped. Brenda's expression changed. She leaned closer to the screen, reading something. Her jaw tightened. What? Dr. Moretti asked. There's a match. Arthur Allen Sterling, born 1957, honorable discharge 2001. She scrolled down. Service record is heavily redacted. Almost everything's blacked out. Dr. Moretti moved behind the desk to look. What does that mean? It means his service was classified, Brenda said quietly. She looked at Serafina differently now, less annoyed, more confused. What exactly did your uncle do in the military? Serafina's throat felt dry. I don't know. He didn't talk about it much. That was true in a way. He talked about it constantly. She just hadn't believed him. Dr. Moretti straightened up. Transfer him to Ward C. I'll handle the VA billing authorization myself. Are you sure? Brenda asked. If the VA disputes… They won't, not with a record like this. He looked at Serafina. You can see him in about an hour. He's going to need someone checking in on him. I will, Serafina said. Every day. She sat in the waiting room until they let her into his room. Arthur was awake. Barely. An IV drip fed into his arm. Monitors beeped softly beside the bed. He looked smaller than before, swallowed up by white sheets and hospital machinery. Hey, she said softly, pulling a chair close. His eyes opened, focused on her face. He tried to smile. You didn't have to, he whispered. Yeah, I did. He reached for her hand, the one without the IV. His grip was weak but steady. You've got that fight, he murmured. Good. She stayed until visiting hours ended, stayed through the shift she was supposed to work at the grocery store, stayed until a nurse gently told her she had to leave, that Arthur needed rest, that she could come back in the morning. Walking out through the hospital lobby, Serafina passed the cafeteria where she worked. Mrs. Tanaka was still there, wiping down tables at the end of her shift. Their eyes met through the glass doors. Mrs. Tanaka just nodded. Serafina nodded back. On the bus ride home, she stared out the window and thought about the look on Brenda's face when she'd seen Arthur's file. Thought about all those redacted lines, all that classified history. She thought about the envelope. And for the first time, she wondered if Arthur's stories hadn't been stories at all. Arthur was transferred to a VA long-term care facility 3 weeks later. It was across town, 2 buses and a 15-minute walk from Serafina's apartment. She couldn't visit as often as she wanted, but she went when she could, twice a week, sometimes 3 times if her schedule allowed. The facility was nicer than she expected. Clean rooms, staff who actually seemed to care. Arthur had his own bed, his own window. He was eating regular meals, taking medication, sleeping under real blankets. He looked better, stronger. His mind seemed clearer, too. On one visit in early July, he was sitting up in bed when she arrived, a notebook open on his lap. He was writing something, slow, careful handwriting that filled page after page. "What's that?" Serafina asked, setting down the small bag she'd brought. "Cookies from the hospital cafeteria." Mrs. Tanaka had sent them. Arthur looked up. "My memory's going," he said simply. "Wrote down things that matter, things that are true." He closed the notebook and held it out to her. "I want you to have this." "Arthur, just take it, please." She took the notebook. It was small, pocket-sized, with a worn leather cover. She flipped through the pages. Names, dates, places, strings of numbers she didn't understand. Some entries were clear. Others were hurried, almost frantic. "What is all this?" "If anyone ever asks," Arthur said, "you'll know what's true." Serafina didn't understand, but she slipped the notebook into her bag next to the envelope he'd given her weeks ago. 2 pieces of a puzzle she couldn't see yet. Her life was getting slightly better. The hospital had given her a small raise, 20 cents an hour, but it was something. She'd finally caught up on rent. The electric company had agreed to a payment plan. She could breathe a little easier, and she'd used part of her first full paycheck to buy Arthur something. She pulled it out of the bag. A thick, warm blanket, navy blue, soft fleece. Arthur stared at it, then at her, his eyes filled with tears. "No one's done this much for me in 20 years, he whispered. Serafina draped the blanket over his legs. "Well, somebody should have." He reached for her hand and held it for a long time, not saying anything. Some things didn't need words. Arthur died on a Tuesday in late August. The facility called Serafina at 6 in the morning. She was getting ready for her shift, standing in her tiny kitchen making coffee when her phone rang. "Miss Thorne, this is Pine Valley VA Care. I'm calling about Arthur Sterling." Her hand froze on the coffee pot. "He passed peacefully in his sleep last night. Heart failure. I'm very sorry for your loss." The words didn't make sense at first. Serafina heard them, but they floated somewhere outside her body, not connecting to anything real. "Miss Thorne, are you there?" "Yes." Her voice sounded strange, distant. "I'm here. We'll need you to come in to handle his personal effects. There's not much. The blanket you brought him, the notebook, a few clothes, and we'll need to discuss arrangements for his remains. If there's no family, I'll be there in an hour." She hung up, stood in her kitchen, staring at nothing. The coffee pot was still in her hand. Arthur was gone. The man she'd brought breakfast to every morning for 6 months. The man who'd told impossible stories and split his sandwich with her when she was hungry. The man who'd looked at her like she mattered. Like what she did mattered. Gone. Serafina set the coffee pot down carefully and sat on the floor. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The grief was too big, too heavy. It sat in her chest like a stone. She called in sick to work, took the bus across town to the facility. They gave her a plastic bag with Arthur's belongings. The blue blanket folded neatly, 3 shirts, a pair of worn shoes, the notebook, and at the bottom, a small envelope addressed to her in Arthur's handwriting. She opened it right there in the hallway. Inside was a single photograph. Arthur, decades younger, maybe in his 40s, standing in a military dress uniform, 3 rows of medals across his chest. On either side of him, 2 men in expensive suits. She recognized one of them, a senator who'd been in the news recently, now retired. The other man she didn't know, but he had that look. Power, authority. She flipped the photograph over. 3 words written on the back in Arthur's shaky handwriting. Remember the girl. Serafina's hands trembled. She went home, sat on her mattress on the floor, pulled out the other envelope. The sealed one Arthur had given her months ago. The one she'd promised to mail if something happened to him. She opened it. Inside was a letter handwritten on lined paper and another copy of the photograph. The letter read, "To whoever reads this, probably General Elizabeth Vance, if the address still works. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't have much to leave behind. No family, no money, nothing that matters to the world. But I want you to know about someone who mattered to me. Her name is Serafina Thorne. For 6 months, she brought me breakfast every single morning. Not because she had to, not because anyone was watching. She did it because she saw me when everyone else looked away. I was a ghost. The system forgot me 20 years ago, and I was fine with that. But she didn't forget. She didn't let me disappear. This country took everything I gave and then lost me in the paperwork. But this girl, this struggling, broke, beautiful girl, she gave me dignity when I had nothing. She deserves better than what this country gave me. Remember her like she remembered me. Arthur Sterling, GS-14, retired." Serafina read it 3 times. Each time the words felt heavier. She looked at the address on the envelope. General Elizabeth Vance, Pentagon, Office of the Inspector General. Arthur hadn't been confused, hadn't been embellishing. He'd been telling the truth the whole time. The next morning, Serafina went to the post office, stood in line for 20 minutes with the envelope in her hand. When she got to the counter, she almost didn't mail it. Almost took it back home and forgot about it. But she'd made a promise. "I need to send this," she said, sliding the envelope across the counter. The postal worker weighed it. $5.60. Serafina paid with crumpled bills from her wallet. She watched the woman stamp it, toss it into a bin with hundreds of other letters. It disappeared into the pile like it had never existed. Walking out of the post office, Serafina felt hollow. No one was going to read that letter. Even if they did, no one was going to care. Arthur was just another forgotten veteran, another name in a system that had already failed him. His letter would get filed away somewhere, and that would be the end of it. She went to his memorial service that Friday. It was held at the VA facility. Just her, a chaplain, and one nurse who'd worked Arthur's wing. No family, no military honor guard, no flag. The chaplain said generic words about service and sacrifice. Serafina barely heard them. When it was over, she walked back to the bus stop where she'd met Arthur 8 months ago. Someone else was sleeping there now. A younger man, maybe 30, with a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry, anything helps." Serafina stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where Arthur used to sleep. Then she went home. 2 weeks passed. She went back to work, back to her double shifts, her night classes, her empty apartment. Life kept moving forward because it had to. She didn't think about the letter. Didn't let herself hope it mattered. Until one morning in mid-September, when she heard the knock on her door. It was 6 a.m. She was running late, pulling on her hospital uniform, gulping down instant coffee. The knock was firm. Official. She opened the door. 3 people in military dress uniforms stood in the hallway. 1 colonel, 2 junior officers. Their brass buttons caught the dim hallway light. The colonel was tall, white, maybe 55. His face was serious, but not unkind. "Serafina Thorne." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Yes, I'm Colonel Miller. These are Officers Gomez and Reed. We're here about Arthur Sterling." The world tilted. "We need to ask you some questions," the colonel continued. "General Vance sent us." Serafina's voice came out barely above a whisper. "General Vance?" "Yes, ma'am. She received Mr. Sterling's letter." He paused. "And she wants to meet you." Serafina had never been on a plane before. Colonel Miller arranged everything. A flight from the local airport to Ronald Reagan Washington National. A car waiting at the terminal. A hotel room in Arlington. Small but clean, nicer than anywhere she'd ever stayed. "General Vance will see you tomorrow morning at No 900, Miller said as they drove through D.C. traffic. "Pentagon E-ring. Don't worry, we'll escort you through security." Serafina stared out the window at monuments and marble buildings. Everything felt enormous, overwhelming. Wrong. "Why does she want to meet me?" she asked quietly. Miller glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "That's her story to tell, Miss Thorne, not mine." That night, Serafina couldn't sleep. She lay in the hotel bed, the softest mattress she'd ever felt, and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Arthur, wondering what she'd walked into, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake mailing that letter. At 8:30 the next morning, Miller picked her up. They drove to the Pentagon. Security took 20 minutes. Metal detectors, ID checks, a visitor badge clipped to her borrowed blazer. Mrs. Tanaka had lent it to her, along with a pair of dress pants that were slightly too long. Serafina felt like she was wearing a costume. Miller led her through endless corridors, polished floors, flags hanging from walls, uniforms everywhere, people walking with purpose, carrying folders, speaking in low, urgent voices. They stopped outside a door marked Office of the Inspector General. Miller knocked twice. "Come in," a woman's voice called. The office was smaller than Serafina expected. A desk, bookshelves, flags in the corner, and behind the desk, a woman in a crisp uniform with 4 stars on her shoulders. General Elizabeth Vance was in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back, sharp eyes that measured Serafina in a single glance. She stood when they entered. "Miss Thorne." Vance came around the desk and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming." Serafina shook it. The general's grip was firm but not crushing. "Please sit." Serafina sat. Miller remained standing by the door. Vance returned to her chair and opened a file on her desk. Serafina could see Arthur's name on the tab. "I received Mr. Sterling's letter 3 weeks ago," Vance began. "It was the first concrete proof we'd had in 15 years that he was alive." She paused. "And then proof that he died." Serafina's throat tightened. "I didn't know what else to do with it." "You did exactly the right thing." Vance leaned forward. "Arthur Sterling was one of the finest intelligence officers this country ever produced. He flew classified missions during some of our most sensitive operations. Desert Storm, Kosovo. Missions that still don't exist on paper." She tapped the file. "When he retired in 2001, he should have had full benefits, full support. Instead, he fell through the cracks." "How?" Serafina asked. "PTSD. A bureaucratic error that lost his file for 2 years. By the time we found it, he'd already disappeared. The VA declared him missing. No one followed up." Vance's voice hardened. "We failed him." "He told me stories," Serafina said quietly, "about helicopters and senators and missions. I thought he was confused." "He wasn't." Vance pulled out the photograph, the one from Arthur's letter. "This was taken in 1998. That's Senator Kirkland on the left, Deputy Director Monroe on the right. Arthur had just extracted them from a collapsing situation in the Balkans, saved their lives." She looked at Serafina. "He saved a lot of lives, and then we forgot him." The weight in Serafina's chest grew heavier. "I'm conducting an audit," Vance continued. "Inspector General review of how the VA handles veterans with classified service records. Arthur's case is the worst I've found, but it's not the only one. There are others, dozens, maybe hundreds, lost in the system." "Why are you telling me this?" Vance closed the file. "Because Arthur's letter wasn't about him. It was about you." She met Serafina's eyes. "He wanted me to remember what you did, and I want to honor that." "I just brought him breakfast." Exactly. Vance's voice softened. You saw a person everyone else had erased. You gave him dignity when the system gave him nothing. That matters, Miss Thorne. That matters more than you know. Serafina didn't know what to say. I want to make this right, Vance said. Establish a memorial fund in Arthur's name. Reform the VA's tracking systems for classified veterans. And I want you to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee about what happened. Serafina's stomach dropped. Testify? Tell them what you told me, what Arthur meant, what it looks like when the system fails. Vance leaned back. I can push policy changes from inside, but your voice, someone who actually lived this, that's what makes people listen. I'm nobody, Serafina whispered. Why would they listen to me? Vance's expression changed, became something fierce and certain. Rank measures authority, she said quietly. Character measures worth. She let that sit for a moment. They'll listen, Vance continued, because you're the one person in this whole story who did the right thing. Not for recognition, not for reward, just because it needed doing. She stood. Will you do it? Serafina thought about Arthur, about his handwriting on that letter. Remember the girl. She took a shaky breath. Yes, they had 3 weeks to prepare. General Vance's team descended on Serafina like a well-oiled machine. Attorneys, communications specialists, policy advisors. They set her up in a small office at the Pentagon Annex and walked her through what a congressional hearing actually meant. You'll sit at the witness table, one attorney explained, showing her photographs of the committee room. Senators will ask questions. Some will be supportive. Others will challenge you. Stay calm. Stick to your story. My story, Serafina repeated. What you did for Arthur Sterling, how the system failed him, why it matters. But as the days went on, Serafina realized they didn't want her whole story. They wanted a version of it. We should probably downplay the poverty angle, the communications director said during one prep session. She was young, white, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than Serafina's rent. Focus on patriotism, service. Keep it positive. Poverty isn't positive? Serafina asked. It can be polarizing. Some senators might see it as political. It's not political. It's true. The woman smiled tightly. We're just trying to keep the message clean. Serafina looked at General Vance, who'd been silent in the corner of the room. What do you think? Serafina asked her directly. Vance set down her coffee. I think if we erase who you are, we erase why Arthur's letter mattered. She looked at her team. She speaks her truth, or this is just theater. The communications director opened her mouth to argue, then thought better of it. Yes, ma'am. The hearing was scheduled for October 12th. Serafina flew back to D.C. the night before. Couldn't sleep. Spent hours staring at her testimony, reading it over and over until the words stopped making sense. Mrs. Tanaka had called her that afternoon. Are you nervous? Terrified. Good. Means you care. Mrs. Tanaka's voice was warm. Just tell them what happened. They can't argue with the truth. They're senators. They can argue with anything. Then let them. You'll still be right. The morning of the hearing, Serafina put on the suit Vance's team had bought for her. Navy blue, professional. It fit perfectly, but it didn't feel like hers. She stared at herself in the hotel mirror and barely recognized the person looking back. Colonel Miller drove her to Capitol Hill. They entered through a side entrance, avoiding the reporters already gathering outside. The Senate Armed Services Committee room was bigger than she'd imagined. Tiered seating rising up like a courtroom. Cameras in the back, press filling the benches, senators trickling in, talking amongst themselves, ignoring her. Serafina sat at the witness table. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the wood. General Vance testified first. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee," Vance began, her voice carrying through the room. "Arthur Allen Sterling served this nation with distinction for 23 years. He flew combat missions in Desert Storm, evacuated diplomats under fire in Kosovo, transported high-value assets through hostile territory in operations that remain classified to this day." She paused, letting that sink in. "And when he retired, we lost him. Not in combat, not overseas. We lost him in paperwork, in bureaucratic errors, in a system that failed to track veterans whose service was too classified to fit neatly into our databases." Vance opened Arthur's file. "By the time we realized he was missing, Arthur Sterling was living on the street, sleeping at a bus stop, forgotten by the country he'd served." One senator leaned forward. Senator Catherine Wells, a Democrat from Massachusetts known for veteran advocacy. "General, how many cases like this exist?" "We've identified 47 so far, Senator. We believe there are more." Murmurs rippled through the room. Then it was Serafina's turn. She walked to the witness table on legs that felt like water, sat down. A microphone was adjusted in front of her. Every eye in the room was on her. Senator Wells spoke first. "Miss Thorne, thank you for being here. I understand you knew Arthur Sterling personally." "Yes, ma'am." "Can you tell us about that relationship?" Serafina's throat was dry. She looked down at her written testimony, then pushed it aside. She didn't need it. "I met Arthur in March," she began. "He slept at the bus stop I used every morning. I started bringing him breakfast, a sandwich, coffee, nothing fancy." Her voice steadied as she spoke. "I didn't know he was a veteran. He told me stories about flying helicopters, about missions. But I thought he was confused, maybe sick. I didn't believe him." She paused. "But I brought him breakfast anyway because it didn't matter if the stories were true. He was still a person." Senator Wells nodded. "And you did this for how long?" 6 months, every single day. Why?" The question hung in the air. "Because no one else did," Serafina said simply. "And because he was someone's grandfather, someone's friend, someone who mattered even if the world forgot." Another senator spoke up. Senator Thomas Burke, a Republican from Texas, older, skeptical expression. "Miss Thorne, that's admirable, but we're here to discuss policy. The VA budget is already strained. Are you suggesting taxpayers should fund care for every homeless person in America?" The room went quiet. Serafina looked at him, felt something shift inside her. Fear becoming anger, anger becoming clarity. "I'm not suggesting anything about every homeless person," she said, her voice firm. "I'm talking about Arthur Sterling specifically, a man who flew senators to safety, who risked his life for this country. You made him a promise when you sent him into danger." She leaned forward slightly. "I kept my promise with a sandwich. You kept yours with paperwork that buried him." The room went completely silent. Senator Burke stiffened, opened his mouth, closed it. Reporters in the back were scribbling furiously. Senator Wells cleared her throat. "Miss Thorne, do you believe the system can be fixed?" "I believe it has to be," Serafina said, "because if we only care about people when we find out they used to be powerful, when we discover they have medals and classified files, then we've already lost." Her voice cracked slightly. "Arthur Sterling wasn't a hero because of his service record. He was a hero because even when the world forgot him, he still woke up every day with dignity." She looked around the room. He deserved better. They all deserve better. And if you can't see that, if you need me to sit here and prove that veterans are worth caring about, then I don't know what I'm doing here. No one spoke. Then General Vance stood. "Mr. Chairman, if I may." The chairman nodded. Vance stepped to the microphone. "Effective immediately, the Inspector General's office is establishing a dedicated task force for veterans with classified service records. We're allocating $5 million to the Arthur Sterling Memorial Fund, which will provide emergency support and case management. She looked at Serafina. And I'm appointing Miss Thorne as community liaison. She'll oversee grant distribution and veteran outreach. Serafina's eyes widened. What? Vance smiled slightly. She knows what accountability looks like. The hearing continued for another hour. Questions about implementation, oversight, budget allocation, but Serafina barely heard it. When it was over, reporters swarmed her in the hallway. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted from every direction. Miss Thorne, how does it feel to change policy? Are you going to work with the VA full-time? Do you have a message for other veterans? Colonel Miller and 2 other officers formed a barrier, guiding her through the crowd, but one reporter's voice cut through. How does it feel to be famous? Serafina stopped, turned. I don't want to be famous, she said quietly. I want Arthur to be remembered. That soundbite played on every news channel that night. 6 months later, everything had changed and nothing had changed. Serafina still lived in the same studio apartment, still took the same bus to work. But now she worked at the VA hospital 3 days a week as a nurse's aide. She'd finally finished her certification and spent the other 2 days managing the Arthur Sterling Memorial Fund. The fund had grown beyond what anyone expected, $5 million from the Department of Defense, another $2 million from private donations after her testimony went viral. They'd awarded grants to 10 organizations in the first round: homeless veteran outreach programs, PTSD counseling centers, a legal aid clinic helping former service members navigate VA bureaucracy. Serafina sat in a small office at the VA hospital and reviewed applications for the second round of grants. 43 requests. She couldn't fund them all, but she'd fund as many as she could. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Vance. Good work on the grant selections? Coffee next week? Serafina smiled and typed back. Yes, I'll bring the sandwiches. She'd become unlikely friends with the general over the past 6 months. Vance had a brother who'd been a Marine killed in Iraq in 2004. She understood what it meant when the system failed people. That afternoon, Serafina was making rounds when she noticed a young woman sitting alone in the waiting area. Early 20s, brown hair, wearing an army jacket 3 sizes too big. She was staring at the floor, arms wrapped around herself. Serafina grabbed 2 cups of coffee and sat down beside her. Do you take it black or with hope? Serafina asked gently. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled slightly. Sugar, please. Serafina handed her the cup. I'm Serafina. I work here. Maya, I'm trying to get my benefits sorted out. They keep telling me to come back, fill out more forms. What branch? Army, medic, discharged last year. Serafina saw herself in Maya's exhausted eyes, saw Arthur in the way she held herself, trying to maintain dignity while the system ground her down. Come with me. She took Maya to her office, pulled out the notebook Arthur had given her, filled with names and numbers and processes for navigating VA bureaucracy. We're going to fix this, Serafina said. Right now. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Why are you helping me? Serafina thought about Arthur, about that first morning at the bus stop. Because somebody taught me that small things aren't small. Later that week, Serafina stood at Arlington National Cemetery. Arthur had been reburied here with full military honors. His headstone read, Arthur Allen Sterling, Intelligence Officer, U.S. Army, 1957 to 2025. She knelt and placed a peanut butter sandwich on the stone, wrapped in wax paper, same as always. I kept my promise, she whispered. The autumn wind moved through the trees. She stayed for a long time, remembering. 1 year after Arthur's death, The Arthur Sterling Memorial Fund had served over 2,000 veterans. Serafina continued working as a VA nurse and fund director. She'd moved to a better apartment. Nothing fancy, just a place with heat that worked and a kitchen with a real stove. She was saving money for the first time in her life. But every morning, she still woke up at 5:30, still made her coffee the same way, still took the same bus route, even though she didn't have to anymore. One Tuesday morning, she stood at that same bus stop, the place where she'd first met Arthur. A young girl stood beside her, maybe 16, part of a mentorship program Serafina had started through the fund. Serafina handed the girl a brown paper bag for later. The girl peeked inside. A sandwich, a banana, a bottle of water. "Someone taught me," Serafina said quietly, "that small things aren't small." The girl nodded, not quite understanding yet, but she would. The bus pulled up. They climbed aboard together. As the bus rolled away from the stop, Serafina looked out the window at the empty sidewalk where Arthur used to sleep. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw him there, smiling, tipping an invisible hat. Then the bus turned the corner, and he was gone. But what he'd taught her remained. Kindness doesn't need an audience. Fairness doesn't need permission. And opportunity starts with seeing people the world wants to forget. The Arthur Sterling Memorial Fund has served over 2,000 veterans in its first year. Serafina Thorne continues to work as a VA nurse and fund director. In 2026, Congress passed the Sterling Act, requiring the VA to establish tracking protocols for veterans with classified service records. What small act of kindness will you choose today? Someone near you needs to be seen. Let us know in the comments what you'll do. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story moved you. Your engagement helps us share more stories that matter. At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next. The moral lesson and life skill. The power of active visibility. The moral. True character is defined by how we treat those who can do absolutely nothing for us. Arthur Sterling was a hero by the world's standards because of his medals, but he was a human being by Serafina's standards because of his hunger. The deepest moral of this story is that human dignity is intrinsic. It is not something a person earns through a resume or loses through poverty. When we wait for proof of someone's worth before offering them kindness, we fail the test of humanity. The life skill. Active visibility. In a fast-paced world, we often develop social blindness to protect our own peace of mind. To master the skill of active visibility, you must intentionally practice two things: recognition over evaluation. See the person first, not their circumstances. Whether it is a homeless man at a bus stop or a stressed colleague, acknowledge their presence before you judge their situation. The consistency rule. Impact is rarely the result of a single grand gesture. It is the result of showing up. Serafina didn't change the law with one sandwich. She changed a life and eventually a system because she stayed consistent. Reliability is the highest form of respect you can give to another person.